Welcome back to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Conrad Weaver, and today we are privileged to be joined by Chief David Rhodes. David is a fire service veteran and editor-in-chief at Fire Engineering Magazine, and he's the education director at FDIC, the Fire Department Instructor Conference. He's here to talk about something that's not talked about often enough: how bad leadership and broken culture in the firehouse are often the real source of stress and trauma, not just the bad calls that first responders experience. So David brings decades of hard-earned insight to the mic. From riding the rig to shaping national policy, he's seen what builds resilience and what breaks people. This conversation goes deep into the cost of toxic work environments and what real support looks like, and how leaders at every level can change the culture for good. Let's dive right in. Here's my conversation with Chief David Rhodes. Well, David, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. So glad to have you on the program today.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so tell us just a little bit about kind of what you do today.
So for the last couple of years, I have been the editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering Magazine and the education director for FDIC, which is the Fire Department Instructors Conference. That morphed into me being the vice president of content and the media brands, which was included Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment, the Journal of Emergency Medical Services, and Firefighter Nation, in addition to FDIC and the stuff.
So, you don't have much to do you?
No, it's I retired coming up on 4 years ago, and had most of that year off, and then came into this role with the company that I'd actually been involved with FDIC and fire engineering for 26 years prior to me retiring.
So you've been in the fire service for a long time. You've seen a lot of leaders come and go. Mm-hmm. How have you seen the conversation around mental health and wellness evolve in your years?
So I don't think there was really much conversation until probably the last 10 years. And it was very limited even then. Definitely have seen a huge surge in it. And it's not just the fire service. I think it's been a surge nationally across, all industries in the last 5 years, I would say. Has really been a prominent to where you can't help but notice that there's talk out there.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing. Because so many people, as we know, have lost their lives, to suicide because of the things that they've experienced, and so I want to kind of look back at you gave a talk on, I guess it was the opening keynote at FDIC in 23, and in that keynote you had a slice that was kind of made its rounds on YouTube and on all the socials, and you talked about the mental health effects of poor leadership.
There's really been little focus on the mental health effects of poor leadership. We tend to want to talk a lot about PTSD because we can blame that on an incident that's beyond our control. But we don't want to talk about the root cause of the majority of stress that causes us issues. Organizational vindictiveness, discrimination, favoritism, and exclusion.
I want you to unpack that for us. Why did you make those comments and kind of dive into that and tell us what you think about those things?
So, I was in the fire service for 36 years, active in the station, worked for 3 different departments, was an instructor that pretty much that entire time. So traveled the country teaching fire classes and talking to a lot of folks. And at the dinner table, every evening, whether you were going out with the guys and gals who were helping you teach or some of the students or whatever, conversations always came back to the culture and what was going on. And firefighters like to complain about stuff. My old friend Brunacini used to say there's 2 things that we don't like: change and the way things are. And so we would always have our little gripe sessions and stuff, but more and more conversations would come up about how the individuals felt like they could not fully contribute at their own organization. And all these were high-speed folks because they were your instructor types. They were outside of their organization getting further training, and none of them had the ambition to like take over the fire department and be the fire chief. They were very content in their role, whether it was a firefighter, a lieutenant, captain, battalion chief. They would naturally progress because of their skill levels, but just horror stories about getting sideways with somebody over an issue and getting moved to a station that nobody wanted to work at. Putting together a program to help with training and it being denied. Just a lot of no's, a lot of being told no. And then conversations about how some leadership cultures would pick winners and losers. And so no matter what your experience level was or your credentials, they would have appointments instead of promotional processes. And if, the running joke was, as long as you were on every committee and seen at headquarters, then you'd get promoted. Meanwhile, the person who's actually out there doing the hard stuff and learning and being a student of the craft, they're not known at headquarters. And so they get passed over for promotion. Some places had good civil service processes that were tests, but then again, it was a written test and maybe an interview. And even those were complained about, even though they were fair and they went by the list or whatever. It was like, this really doesn't tell you if you're going to be good at being an officer. It's just, can you study for a test and can you answer a few questions, and how it is, the questions
being on the fire ground, you're in that situation, and your work and your knowledge of, how to attack this fire or how to solve this problem is really the key to your leadership skills.
Right. And so the assessments or testing processes don't really assess that. They use a very old methodology, a multiple choice test, and then a structured interview. And we all know that those structured interview questions, they're all out there. And so you don't know which ones you're going to get, but like they're all out there, and you practice them, and, you practice your hand position and you tuck your coat in, and you can kind of BS your way through it. And we, you notice on the list, you're like, man, that guy can't, put out a tissue fire with a bucket of water. It's like, but he's number one on the test. So it gave you the best test takers. And then sometimes there was overlap. It was good folks that got it. But all those conversations, and then my personal experiences was like, we would talk about bad calls that we had been on and stuff. And I kept noticing everybody would say, the calls don't really bother me that much. It's just the things that I have to deal with all the time is just the daily crap about, not being able to get to the station you want to work at, or not being able to contribute in a way that you want to, or being denied training while somebody else is always given the opportunity to go train. So whether real or perceived, that was the conversations. And so I had to be very, very careful in the way I put that, because I know PTSD is real. And I'm not a researcher or a clinician. I was just speaking strictly from my conversations over 7 years and my own personal experiences. But I personally went on a lot of horrible calls, mutilation, death, kids, and stuff. And none of them had an effect on me that required any professional intervention and what have you. So I'm like, why is that not the case? I really didn't have, I would say probably half of my career, maybe a little less, really strong, good, supportive leadership. But then that other half or more very horrible toxic leadership. And so in talking to some folks that were in the mental health arena and going to a few classes, and I started listening, and I kind of came to my own conclusion that I was lucky in that I had all the legs of the stool. And even though I was missing at some parts the organizational leadership strength and guidance, I had strong family life. I had strong friends. I had Georgia Smoke Divers as an outlet to teach. I had my own training company as an outlet to teach. I had FDIC as an outlet to teach. I had the magazine to write for. And so I could fulfill the things that I wasn't getting at work through those outside activities. So that's why, they didn't cause me the problems that another person may cause. And that got me really thinking about how important it is when you look at the cross section of society that we have in the organizations. Sometimes the department is the anchor for that person. Mm-hmm. And if they don't have the support, the culture, the belonging, the sense of being able to contribute, be a part of something bigger than themselves, then when they do have that bad call, that bad incident, whatever it is, they don't have the system to process it. Mm-hmm. And then that's kind of when things go south. And it it's such a complicated issue because it's not always the organization. There's some good organizations that have people that have a lot of problems, mm-hmm. but they've had problems outside of work for a long
Sure.
time, bad relationships, substance abuse, whatever. Mm-hmm. So there is, there's causation between work and those things, but there's also people who bring that to the work. So yeah, that was it. I didn't want to diminish the fact that there are things that happen that cause tremendous PTSD and is an issue that has to be treated. But I think the leadership role comes in to that person's ability to cope and process it. And if they don't feel they're supported, then that removes one of the tools off the table. And in some cases, the toxic environment can be so bad that there doesn't need to be an incident, whatever. It's just basically mental torment. The bigger message is it's, leadership issues, toxic work environments are universal. They're not limited to public safety agencies.
Mm-hmm. The National FOP, they do a survey periodically, and I know in several of their recent surveys, the top two stressors are organizational.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, has the IAFF ever done something like that as well?
Not to my knowledge. I do know there is there are studies out there. A lot of them come from the military. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things, one of our subject matter experts in mental health that writes for us and all, she has told me, that it's really been looked at as that you have that kind of cross. You have some military folks with the suicide tendencies that are searching for that sense of belonging type, but then you have others who just suffer from that same thing, is like they felt like they were abandoned by their leadership or politically decision making, or they won't let us win this war. And I've seen 30 of my friends get killed because they won't let us shoot because of a policy, or, and so it gets pretty complicated. So there's no like one thing, but I do know, I think without being a researcher or anything, if you have leadership that is consistent, that is fair to the point of equal distribution of policy and disciplinary things, there's not a grand obvious favoritism of one group or another group or whatever. It's just you come to work and you feel like you got a fair shot. The people who do the job well and who are dedicated get rewarded with promotions, whether through an objective or subjective process. It does create a totally different ability to enjoy coming to work and to make it meaningful. I mean, you're already doing it as a civil servant, so there's something in there that you want to serve the community, and you're not doing it for the money, that's for sure. You might be doing it for the schedule, to have time to do other things, but it definitely makes a difference in the way you approach getting up and going to work. When it's like, man, I can't wait to get there, or it's like, oh crap, I got to go in there again. And I've been on both, and there's never a day that I didn't want to be a firefighter, but there were a few times in my career where I did not want to go to that particular assignment.
So you mentioned schedule. I want to ask you this. There's a movement in some circles to move to a 24/72 schedule. What's your thoughts on that? What's your opinions? And do you think it's something that's effective?
I actually do. I actually worked that schedule. That was the first schedule I ever worked. As a 19-year-old who wanted to be at the fire station every day, I hated it because I wanted to be there every day. And, the fires couldn't go out without me. We changed to 24/48. That increased our pay, and it increased the communications because now you did see everybody. A shift, B shift, C shift, you're either coming or going. You saw everybody. When you add that fourth shift, there's a total disconnect between. And so it creates some organizational problems. But as far as the work time, it's a 42-hour work week, which is normal. You just get them all in 24-hour segments. But I do think that it's healthy, but there's a caveat to that, because we know how firefighters are. And if you're going to work 24/72 and then go work part-time at another fire department or at another ambulance service, it doesn't do any good. So it could actually just give you more time to work at more other places. And so that's one piece of advice. If somebody's interviewing me, what would you say to the new person coming in? I'm like, don't work part-time in anything related where you're responding to calls. And I give them the analogy: you got so many calls in you. Do you want to get them all in 10 years, or do you want to get them in 30 years? And it's hard because people love it. I mean, it's part of their deal. But I would say, be an instructor, teach, work at the academy kind of stuff, but don't work shift.
I see that, locally, up in Emmitsburg, it's a mostly volunteer firehouse, and at least on the fire side, on the EMS side, it's, they have paid people there, but I see people working full time down in Virginia or in Baltimore, and then they come home and they volunteer, and they're always at the firehouse.
Yeah. Yeah. And I live in a county that's very good volunteer fire department. Friend of mine runs it. I actually taught him his basic firefighter class when he first got started. I was a state academy instructor and drove out here and taught his class. And so he's the chief now. And so when I moved out here, he was like, hey, we want you to volunteer and all. And it was like, I wanted to, because I wanted to be part of the community and all. But at the time I'm working in Atlanta, and I mean, we're super busy. Not a lot of sleep, on duty. And I'm like, that's the last thing I need to do. One, to my family, I'm already gone enough. And so I was like, what if I joined and like maybe did some training or something like that for you? And he goes, well, I really need, somebody that can respond and be on the calls. And it was tough to say no, but I said no. And I mean, I'm still friends with the guy. I try to take him out to eat a couple times a year, and I try to support him as much as I can. But I just needed that time to be away from running calls.
I think that's so important. It's
hard
healthy
to say no, though.
Right. Especially in a tight community like Emmitsburg. I mean, it's a powerful fire community, a really tight knit community there. And, and I know people who are in leadership there within the Emmitsburg, system there, who work full time other places. And I'm worried about them, long term. You can't keep doing that, working your 24 and coming home, and next thing you know, you're at 2:30 in the morning and you're running a call. Hey, over the years, I've struggled with maintaining a consistent workout. And then going into the gym, sometimes I wasn't really sure what I should be doing to achieve the goals that I want. And then I discovered TrainWell. TrainWell is a program that actually works to keep me on track to achieve the goals I have. So for the past few weeks, I've been using TrainWell, which paired me with an actual trainer. After I signed up, I had a Zoom call with my personal trainer who set up a program that I now use every day. It was easy to sign up, and I love that my workouts are now specifically made for me. So if you have some of the same issues with being consistent and knowing what to do, TrainWell may have a solution for you. You can take the quiz that pairs you with your perfect trainer, and you can get 14 days of free training at go.trainwell.net/first responder wellness. That's go.trainwell.net/first responder wellness. I've put a link in the show notes below, so you can just click on it and go right there and sign up. And you can learn how you can train well. See what I did there? Go check it out.
It's a delicate balance, because I don't want people not to be so into it that they're professional and they're always learning and they're dedicated, but you do have to have a life outside of that. That can't be the only thing.
How important is it to have friends who are not firefighters?
It's huge. Yeah, it's huge. And it's easy to get sucked into, that's all the people you hang out with. But I still have, two of my best friends from high school who actually, one of them was a firefighter for a little while, worked with me early on, but moved on to other things. And, I still go on vacation with them. That's who I go travel with. And then I have fire department folks too, that I play golf with sometimes, and all. They're both important, but it is good to have that outside connection, because then you're not always talking about it. Because if you're with firefighters, you're pretty much always talking about fire department. And
that there's been a rise, kind of changing the theme here. There's been a rise of the influence of peer support within the fire community, within first responders in general, which is great, which is a good program to have. But leadership is lonely. It's lonely at the top, as they say.
Yep.
What kind of peer support do leaders have, and what kind of peer support should they have?
That's a great question. I don't think there is a lot of peer support. I think there's friends and chiefs organizations, and I'm sure that those conversations come up, but it's definitely overlooked for sure. And you think about this whole thing with the safety culture and the rules. You can't do this. We're not going to let you do this. And then there's this whole fight against that. It's like, that's what we're here for. We're here to make rescues. We got millions of dollars worth of equipment. You won't let us use it. And you think about the psychological effects of a serious injury or death in an organization to the crew. And then what are the effects of the leadership? And in some cases, I think on a national level, that's a fault at the highest levels, because they created such a stigma around that it was like, oh, well, if you have a line of duty death in your organization, you're horrible. And that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are cases where the organizational process, 1,000 accidents to the one fatal incident or whatever has happened because of a lack of leadership. But sometimes it has nothing to do with it. It's just the person is at the wrong place at the wrong time, and the beam falls on them. I mean, it's the nature of the work.
So what needs to change in order to get leaders who kind of understand these things and put them into practice as far as taking care of their people and reducing that potential stress and trauma, within the organization?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because it's usually the leaders who create toxic environments don't really know that about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the third party agency 360 review, anonymous, and somebody with a good background who can filter the noise and just the typical complaining out with the serious, pattern matching. Okay, we're going to send this out, and we're going to ask these questions, and then there's assessment, and then there's, feedback to the leadership team is like, here's the perceptions, and then here's where we found patterns. And that information needs to be shared with them, so that they know exactly what the feeling is in the organization, what the culture is. They kind of have that network already, because we're not shy with giving feedback. But it's human nature to want to be around people that agree with you.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And that can sometimes be the most dangerous time, because you create that very comfortable feeling around you. And then if you have created an atmosphere to where somebody disagrees with something in public and then they disappear to the slowest station, then you're not going to get good feedback, So I think we could use psychology testing to help with promotional processes. I know there was a company that created one for an entrance exam that was like, I can give a person this written test. They have to answer these questions, and I can tell you right away if they're going to be good and successful. The problem is people were scared of it. People were scared of that test. What happens if your department is focused on hiring a certain group? That's the priority of the year or whatever. And if they administer that test and it doesn't match your goals, then you feel that that's not a valid test, when the real solution is in your recruiting for people to take the test. So you got to increase your numbers of whatever group, because it's the same across the board numbers wise, but usually those groups are smaller number of applicants already, so they're at a disadvantage there. So you have to change your recruiting model. But they're extremely powerful tests. And then also for leadership roles, for being an officer, it's like a different skill set, and we see it all the time. Not always. Sometimes it's hand in hand, and it'll be hand in hand that okay, this guy's a sharp firefighter. They're very knowledgeable of everything, and they get moved up to lieutenant, and that works pretty good because it's still somewhat in that area. But then they move up to captain, they have more responsibility, and they're more in the leadership of everything, not just the fire. And they kind of start to, crash a little bit as a leader. They're still good on the fire ground, but not so great at the station. So you might have a funky culture at the station, and then that will start to erode the fire fighting part. And then, of course, the higher you go, the more impact you have on the people that are working under you. So there needs to be there needs to be a psychological component to those tests, not just a tactical or cognitive deal. I think there's probably a great profile of what good leadership is and what the traits are. And it'd just be another tool. It wouldn't be absolute, but it'd be another tool to give you some possibly some big time problem prevention.
Is there anything like in a lot of law enforcement agencies now, they're implementing annual psychological reviews or meeting with the local counsel or shrink, whatever you may call it. Is there something like that within the fire service?
Only on the front end.
Only on the front end.
Yeah, only on the front end, and not all across, every organization, but there are some larger organizations that do like a psychological test ahead of time. And
I know it can become a little bit of a check the box thing. I know here in Maryland, they've implemented it statewide. So all law enforcement officers have to go see a psychologist every year. And I've heard from different sources that it kind of depends on who you go see. It's more of a check the box thing. You sit down in the
somebody got a good government contract.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But, to really be effective, then that you have to train those psychologists to be able to dig in and not just allow the person to sit there and, be able to check the box. Yeah.
And we used to sort of handle without peer support, without an organized thing. I mean, we handled it and processed things at the station among the crew. Peer support is much better because you're more comfortable talking to people who know where you've been and are people you already know. If a stranger shows up, with 6 PhDs and so and so, you're not going to talk the same way to them or whatever. So there has to be that relationship on the front end. And I think the best peer support is your crew and your family. And the organized peer support is almost just a booster shot to that. And maybe for some long-term monitoring. And then you are going to have a person, people are different. So what works for one person is not going to work, for another. And there could be somebody that's affected different that needs a different level of support. That's just because we're all built a little different.
Yeah. So I think from your vantage point, you kind of see the fire service from a 50,000 foot view oftentimes. What do you think is the future for the fire service in the areas of mental health and wellness?
I think more access to options, so that you're not boxed into your own, your own services within your organization, that maybe you have resources that are out there, which they're out there. It's just knowing about them, whether it's the IEFF resources, it could be local community resources. And I think more education to the firefighters on the front end coming in to recruit school. Hey, here's some warning signs. Here's some things to look for yourself. And here's some things to look for your coworkers. And then I think hearing other people's stories are good because you can relate to them, and it makes it okay. Well, if that happened to that joker, look at that guy. He's got 80,000 tattoos and his biceps are big around as my legs. And he's a tough guy. So if he had an issue, then it's okay for me to have an issue, and sort of relaxing the whole stigma of treatment. Because my generation was like, if you had to go talk to a counselor, something was wrong with you. That's right. Something's wrong with him.
Yeah,
he's crazy.
Yeah.
What have you? And I think that's broken with the youngest generation, for sure. But we're still in that transition. There's still a mixture of folks in there. So it's definitely more accepted. But I think the easier access, more emphasis on the peer support of your immediate coworkers versus the professional I think more emphasis on that, because it's almost like we went through a phase where the officers couldn't discipline anybody. It had to go to the Office of Internal Affairs, and that was this other group that was up there, and it transferred the responsibility over to them. So now you didn't have to be the bad guy. So all you had to do was fill out the paperwork and send it to somebody else. And I think in some cases there's so much emphasis on the organized peer support that people just forget to be who they are at the station. And instead of saying, "Hey man, you good?" or joking about what happened or what have you, is like, okay, well, we got to call the peer support. Same with a firefighter rescue. We established rapid intervention team. Well, that doesn't mean you can't get your buddy out. You don't have to call for the formal team. You might need them to get started, but that doesn't mean that you don't take action, or that you don't take action to rescue yourself. So I think the education early on and lots of options that meet everybody's need. Some people are going to be more comfortable talking to somebody at their church. Some people are going to be more comfortable with the peer support team. Some people are going to be more comfortable talking to their family, and letting people know that any of them are okay.
I've often said that whether you're in law enforcement or the fire service or even dispatch, whatever organization you're, if your organization isn't providing those kind of services for you, you're still responsible for yourself.
Yes.
And need to work on, educating yourself on how to take care of you. Right.
Yep. I read one of the books that we published from Jada Hudson, and it was just about why people become firefighters, why they become nurses, and it talked about like trauma and different things that happen. And I had my parents are still alive and still together, and I had a great home life. I didn't have, you're thinking, okay, well, they were abused or that kind of trauma. And I'm like, well, this doesn't fit me. This, why I came in the fire service doesn't fit me and all. And I'm about halfway through that book, and all of a sudden I was like, holy crap. My best friend got killed in a car wreck when I was in 9th grade. And of course I didn't associate the two.
Sure.
And I was like, and then I remember the story was they were out in the middle of nowhere. It was a 30, 45 minute response to get help to them and all that. And I'm like, and then I'm like, all right, this lady wrote this book. She's like watching me. And then it was like telling you why you did all these things, but you need to know that early on. It's not that it's bad.
Right.
It's just, you need to have the awareness of it so that you know what's going on, and then you can intervene and shore up areas that need to be shored up. I mean, I feel very fortunate again to have all those legs of the stool in place. But I can see how somebody could easily, get tripped up with just the slightest things. And it's like a recipe for a bomb, toxic environment, this call, and that could be all you need for the recipe, or it could be a lot of little things over a long period of time. But
what can someone do if perhaps they're one of those younger generation that kind of gets some of this stuff more than some of the older generation? What can they do to lead up when it comes to these things?
I think the biggest thing is having conversations. There's nothing better than the firehouse kitchen table, and asking a lot of questions, so you're not, people don't want to be fixed, quote, like, I got to fix this guy. I want to, so-and-so. It's like, but people like to have discussions and talk, and everybody has a different perspective on it. So I think if they just kind of bring up the subjects and say, hey, how did, I know you guys have seen a lot of stuff over the years. Like, what's the worst thing you saw? And like, how did you deal with it? And if nothing else, that gets them talking about it. They may not even realize that's still in there, so I think conversations at the kitchen table are good. And then the example too, like, not being afraid to have the peer support folks over to talk in non-emergency times, and talk about what's going on and what's new, what's the latest. And sometimes people will relate to something without having to tell their business. They're picking up on it. They may not even sit at the table. They may be in the recliner with the remote, but they're listening.
So as I want to kind of wrap up here, and I want to give you kind of the final word here. What would you say to those leaders out there who are perhaps, maybe struggling with these issues, and what would you say to encourage them to kind of really lead by example?
A lot of self-assessment, get some feedback from folks that aren't necessarily in your inner circle. And you have to, consciously seek that out and stay focused on the fact that we're there to serve the public. We're not building kingdoms, and, to see how much power we have. Truly understand what servant leadership is and practice that across the board. Doesn't mean everybody's going to be happy with every decision you make or whatever, but we're all pretty smart, and we know your intent. We know when you have good intentions. And if you have good intentions and you have a good reputation and you've established trust, then if you slip up, you get forgiveness. So you have to be super self-aware and get out of the office. You get trapped in that office by yourself, and you're only dealing with the mayor or the council or the budget, and then your small little team. You have, just like you say, the crews have to schedule time for training and whatever. You have to get out and talk to the folks that are doing the work on the ground, and go to some calls and see what's happening. I say 4 years off the line, and your perception of what's going on is so flawed that you need to do a ride along with your own crews, and then have people outside your organization too that you can get feedback from, that are your peer group. But you need to really, I think every leader should be asking themselves, like, every day, am I creating a healthy or a toxic environment? And you can be doing both at the same time. You could have this part over here as toxic as it can be, and this part over here is as great as it can be. And it's the difference in how you're handling things, at your level. So, but it's hard to self-diagnose toxic leadership, for sure. Everybody thinks they're doing a great job, and they agree with everything we say. Oh yeah, absolutely. And they read all the books, but they don't realize the impact of what's happening. And it could be as simple as a crappy promotional process, or an unfair transfer or whatever. And that starts the ball rolling.
Yeah. Well, David, this has been a great conversation. I want to say thank you again for coming on the program. So if someone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Email david.rhodes, RHODES, at clarionevents.com. You can get me on social media, Chief David Rhodes, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And I try to respond to everything, but I do get about 200 or 300 messages a day. So don't hit me up multiple times if I don't get back to you right away. But I appreciate you having me on the show, and I appreciate all the work you guys do.
Well, that's a wrap for today's conversation with Chief David Rhodes. If something you heard today hit home, share this episode with your crew or your leadership team. This isn't just about firefighting. It's about the kind of culture you want to build and the kind of people you want to become. And if you'd like to connect with David or learn more about his work, check out the show notes for all the links. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the First Responder Wellness Podcast wherever you get your podcast. We've got more real, raw, and relevant conversations coming your way. And finally, thank you for listening. Thank you for serving and for doing the hard work of wellness. We'll be back next week with more First Responder Wellness conversations. And remember that you are not alone. If you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can dial 988 for help. Until next time, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.